So, in this evening's reading, Amy Wallen, who is our senior writer in residence, will be introducing Cristina Garcia, and then I will introduce Rosanna Warren. Amy Wallen.
All right, I want to interrupt this program for a moment with a note to our sponsor, Bob Boyers, and say there must be something right at this institute because yesterday's student reading was like 3 hours of wow. Incredible. You guys were amazing. Yeah, I know. I've been here for 15 years. It was incredible. Thank you. Bienvenidos al mundo de Cristina Garcia. Esta introducción va a ser para los bilingües aquí en el instituto. Oh, I'm sorry. This is America. English only, please. But how can I do Cristina's literary collection justice in English when it reads as lyrical as the Romantic Spanish language, albeit written in English? But viva la Revolución Americana, we will speak English, and instead let's travel to the 21st parallel. We will avoid Havana for the moment, all those gringos who romanticize Cuba and want to pretend they're Hemingway drinking 16 Cuba Libres a day. Instead, we're going to pile into a 1952 DeSoto and take a drive. Bring your swim fins, because we might take a side trip to Miami or Nueva York or even Guatemala. You have to climb in the back door of the DeSoto, the only working door, and go ahead and climb on over into the front seat because we have a lot of characters to pack in here. Here come the Del Pinos. They will be arguing the whole time. They're a little bit crazy. But you'll probably get a potion for love, and a ghost or a lover will need to sit on your lap. Lourdes Del Pino is still in New York fighting communism from behind her bakery counter. She's rather large, but make room. Here comes the National Book Award Committee. Let them have a seat by the window. They deserve a good seat. Dreaming in Cuban, Cristina's debut novel, was a finalist. And be on your best behavior, because Michiko Kakutani from the New York Times is here. We will let her ride front and center, her knees getting in the way of the gear shift. Here's what she said about Cristina. Fierce, visionary, and at the same time oddly beguiling and funny. Dreaming in Cuban is a completely original novel, a writer blessed with a poet's ear for language, a historian's fascination with the past, and a musician's intuitive understanding of the ebb and flow of emotion. Squeeze in. An ex-gorilla with her friend's parrot wants in. That bird will be squawking revolutionary poetry the whole ride, but don't let on you like it, because here's the colonel in his well-fitted uniform, ready to pull out his pistol, literally and figuratively, any minute now. Of course, he takes the front passenger seat, so narcissistic. Made Celia Del Pino move for him, although I think she may have volunteered. That svelte Lady Matador in her suit of lights will pull him out by the horn and have him for breakfast. Everyone is willing to make room for her in her suit of lights. Okay, scoot over some more. A Ride with Cristina is full of the supernatural, poetic, political, family intimacy. There's entrapment, estrangement, asylums, Yoruba potions, love letters, murderers, scientists, exiles, and revolutionaries. Buckle your seatbelts. Michiko Kakutani also said Cristina proved she's as good at writing about men as she is about women. No truer statement when in the Lady Matador's hotel we have a female ex-gorilla who is out for retribution for her brother, a ghost who directs her next murder. The Lady Matador who beguiles us in her macho bravery, and the man who is brokenhearted over the children he had to leave behind in Cuba and decides nothing will keep him from his new adopted daughter. Our vehicle is now filled with immigrants, not just from Cuba or Central America. Now we have a Korean manufacturing businessman with us, too. Cristina's work has been translated into 14 languages, after all. There's still room to stand on the running board, and it's worth the ride. No, we aren't there yet. Cristina is the author of 6 novels, including Dreaming in Cuban, The Aguero Sisters, Monkey Hunting, A Handbook to Luck, and The Lady Matador's Hotel. Garcia has edited 2 anthologies. 2 works for young readers, The Dog Who Loved the Moon and I Want to Be Your Shoebox. She's written a collection of poetry, The Lesser Tragedy of Death. Her recent young adult novel, Dreams of Significant Girls, is set in a Swiss boarding school in the 1970s. Hang on, there's one more passenger. It's El Comandante himself. El Líder is now old, an octogenarian. Why isn't he dead yet? Oh, Cristina never says it's Fidel, but we aren't fooled. Who else's point of view would it be, in denial that both his health and country are headed for disaster? Everybody out as we get in the Cadillac of Goyo Herrera, who's hell-bent on staying alive long enough to see the dictator to his grave. In her most recent novel, King of Cuba, we take a ride from Miami to New York with the irascible Cuban exile, Goyo Herrera, who decides it's fine time El Comandante should die, and he's taking it into his own arthritic hands. Scooch, scooch. Alan Chuse from NPR is getting in the caddy, and he said Garcia's serio-comic novel gives us all the pop delight of a musical based on major historical events and a devastating portrait of two men and a tyrannical government on the way out. In Havana, the revolution, as Garcia herself suggests, is about to make its last gasp. El Comandante seems to realize this himself. People would rather watch Gaucho Love, their favorite telenovela, than listen to a speech the decrepit dictator laments. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Herrera, in his Cadillac, finds himself tangled up in memories of his old home island, its dialects, Garcia writes, its hummingbirds, its fish, its chaos, its peanut vendors, its Chinese lotteries, its cacophonies, its myths, its terrors. We are in Goyo's Cadillac with these memories swirling around in his mind and still stinging from the fact that decades ago, El Comandante seduced and impregnated the woman he loved above all others. We are now on a collision course with the Cuban ruler. Remember when Fidel Castro tried out for the Washington Senators baseball team and got rejected, so he went home and started a revolution? Reading King of Cuba will make you want to believe that. You'll wish Gabriel Garcia Marquez had written at least one telenovela, and maybe Tolstoy could have written an episode of Dallas. The farcical is magical and real, all on the same bumpy road. The darkly comic is heartbreaking and twisted, all at the same time. Cristina doesn't just write as well as any of those men. She makes you wonder if they would be up to the challenge. At once dark and fabulously absurd, she writes masterpieces. Everybody out of the car. We have arrived. Cristina Garcia is here wearing her own suit of lights. Bienvenidos, Cristina.
Thank you. That was extraordinary. I don't want to get out of the car. Where else are we going? Thank you. Thank you. Incredibly kind and lovely. I just want to give a huge thanks to Bob and Peggy Boyers for having me back. It's been about 15 years. I was last here with my 6-year-old in tow, I think, and I've missed this place and didn't realize how much till I got back, and the flashbacks started happening. I also, in 1990, so 24 years ago, also came here as a student. I was a journalist at the time, and I had just quit my journalism job and came here for a month to transition. My last day was something like July 1st, and then I got on a plane and I came here for a month. And I realized then, with everybody bent over and arguing over this semicolon or that adjective, that I was home. And so it's just wonderful to be back home again. So thank you. I'm going to read maybe a couple of. It's a sort of fractured narrative. I'm going to just read from the latest book, King of Cuba, which came out last year, and it's a book that careens. And I'm going to start using all this motoring verbs here, but it careens between the perspective of El Comandante, a fictionalized Fidel Castro, and as you mentioned, one of his many nemeses in Miami on the other side of the Straits of Florida, Goyo Herrera in his 80s. And then the stranglehold they have on the narrative is broken up by lots of different voices who come up in footnotes and interstitial sections between and inside chapters. And so I'll try and give you a little taste, maybe by reading a couple of different sections to give you an idea of some of the tapestry at work here. So there's two fictitious people here in this section I'm going to read. There's El Comandante, based on Fidel Castro, of course. And then there's Babo, who's based on Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And in this section, El Comandante travels to Mexico City to see his friend on his deathbed. The other thing you need to know is Gloria is El Comandante's wife, and I forget what Babo's wife's name is, but she'll come up too. Okay. No, Gloria is Babo's wife, sorry, and Delia is El Comandante's wife. Okay. So now they're going down to visit Babo in his study. Okay. It was here that his friend, Babo, had insisted on spending his final days. He wanted, simply, to die surrounded by books. There were no family photographs, no souvenirs of his travels, no sign of his Nobel medal or snapshots of him with the great men of his day, the tyrant included. Just books, his and others, Babo's eternal friends, and a vase of hyacinths on the nightstand. El Comandante approached his friend cautiously. He was relieved that Babo was alive, but afraid that there was nothing left for them to discuss. In their heyday, their conversations had lasted for days, interspersed with fishing trips and the reverential hush that accompanied their smoking of fine island cigars. There were few subjects they hadn't broached, analyzed, laughed over, and argued about, all the while growing fonder and more admiring of each other. Not that there hadn't been a thorn or two. Once Babo stopped speaking to the tyrant for months over a rust-colored beauty they discovered on a visit to El Cobre's foundry. She was just Babo's type, too, pure, liquefied mulata sugar. But at the last minute, the tyrant chose her for himself, pulling a revolutionary droit de seigneur. Every now and then, the incident rippled through their friendship like a Cuban water snake. Nonetheless, Babo had proved as savvy about politics as he was at writing about the darkest recesses of the human heart. It was a rare combination in a man of his accomplishments, and there'd been a time when the tyrant had envied his friend's gifts. In truth, his envy still flared on occasion. But Babo's unfailing good humor, his generosity toward the revolution, and his unflagging personal loyalty to El Comandante had won him over. There wasn't another soul on the planet, save Fernando, El Comandante's brother, whom he trusted as much. Hombre, what are you doing there, lying like a beached whale? Babo opened his rheumy eyes and cracked a half smile. That initial spot on his lungs had developed into a tangled web of ailments impossible to unravel. As the afternoon light faded, Babo's surprisingly small study filled with shadows. Night's arrival would console El Comandante, at least until his exhaustion began to feed his paranoia and worsen his mood. Hijo de puta, Babo whispered, his grin widening a quarter inch. Did they tell you I was dead? The pale light gleamed off the side rail of his bed. It seemed to El Comandante that something in the room itself, in the shelves of thick, silent tomes, in the collection of vintage typewriters and the fountain pens arranged in a perfect arc across Babo's desk, seemed charged in some imperceptible way. His friend's breathing grew labored, deliberate, as if he had to concentrate on it fully. A nurse who reminded the tyrant of his mother, dark-skinned with sinewy legs, held a handkerchief to Babo's mouth until he expectorated. Carajo, you look almost peaceful, El Comandante joked. That's something we vowed never to become. Sorry, someone told me that I'm sounding, because I've spent a lot of time in Texas, like Tex-Mexy. So for those, if you're not hearing an authentic Cuban accent, I haven't been in Miami for a while, so forgive me. So let me try that again. Carajo, you look almost peaceful, El Comandante yoked. That's something we vowed never to become. The old friends coughed companionably. The nurse poured each of them a glass of water, which their respective wives helped administer. All this love, and we're still powerless against death, Babo said, regaining his composure. In the end, I want to leave behind something imagined, not simply recalled. The tyrant couldn't have disagreed with Babo more, but he was in no mood to antagonize him on his deathbed. No, he would much rather reminisce over his lurid, manic, garish, heroic, lived life than dwell on anything that even the great Babo could conjure up. It was action that fueled his ideas, El Líder thought, not the other way around. He was a man of action and appetites. Facts paralyze, his friend continued, a disconcerting rumbling emanating from his chest. Imagination frees us. El Comandante grew impatient. But what good is imagination without action? No history is made, no lives are changed, worthless. He registered the discomfort on his friend's face. You deliver words, I deliver action. Words are action, mi amigo, as compressed and devastating as any bullet or caress. Babo said with surprising vigor. What do we have left except... He paused. The adventure of language between two wrecked ships. Carajo, everything you say is invention, the tyrant countered. Couldn't I say the same about you? Son of a bitch. If Babo weren't so sick, El Comandante would launch into one of his infinite tirades. Instead, he sulked. Have we forgotten how to laugh at ourselves? Babo chided. Then this must be the end. The two remained silent for a moment, neither wanting to surrender to the other. Finally, Babo blinked and changed the subject. These days, I prefer the language of rain. He's been praying for rain, Gloria interjected dully. The tyrant turned to her. And what have you done about it? About what? She inspected her fingernails. The rain. Mi cielo, they're in a drought, Delia protested. Haven't you been listening to the news? Gloria, did you know we have the worst meteorologist in Havana? This is your husband's last request and you haven't found a way to grant it? El Comandante demanded. But Jefe, how can I? There are machines that can make rain. I could stand on the roof myself with a fucking bucket so that he might... Don't get upset, Papi. This isn't something you can control. Delia flushed with embarrassment. The obdurate bells of Mexico City announced 6 o'clock, echoed by the grandfather clock in the hall. Socialism or death? What was the damn difference? Babo remained placid in his bed, inhabiting the hour. Then, pink nostrils quivering, he requested his daily ration of chocolate tapioca and dispatched every last wobbly spoonful with enthusiasm. Visibly weakened by the effort, he collapsed onto his pillows and closed his eyes. Perhaps he was traveling back in time, to his childhood, to the river journey with his grandparents that had marked him forever. The tyrant felt faint, though his heart beat wildly. Delia held a vial under his nose that smelled of Fernando's prison disinfectant. His brother had stayed behind in Havana, tending to emergencies. Another hunger striker had tried to hang himself in La Cabaña. It's a notorious prison in Havana. Fernando's daughter had imprudently called a dissident blogger, quote, a sex-starved lesbian whore, end quote, on national television, and was now combating a firestorm of international criticism. And, worst of all, one of the Damas de Blanco had set herself on fire in the Plaza de Armas with rationed gasoline, like that monk in Vietnam years ago. Were the times really so desperate? Drowsiness enveloped the tyrant. He didn't want to nap, but his body overruled him. With Delia's help, he settled himself in an overstuffed chair by Babo's bedside, sank his head to his chest, and like his friend, fell asleep. The two snoozed together, leaving their wives to freely ignore each other. An hour later, the men awoke with a start almost simultaneously. The evening sky was hazy, reflecting the lights and smog of the city. Babo and El Comandante were pleased to find themselves still in each other's company. The moon dies with the night on its back. Babo's face creased with emotion. I thought I had dreamt your visit. I'm no dream, the tyrant said, pressing his tongue against his palate. Nor am I ready to repent or regret. Babo laughed a weak facsimile of his laugh. His mind was shorn of most wordplay, but his emotions remained fierce. "To the only son of a bitch who ever came close," he said, quoting himself. "To the monarch of the word," El Comandante retorted, holding up an imaginary champagne glass. In the spreading darkness, the old friends surrendered to the ordinary happiness of being together, oblivious to the sounds beyond the study. The ringing telephone, a faraway television, the ticking of the grandfather clock, the few drops of rain moistening Babo's windowsill at last. So that's all I'm going to read from this section anyway. And I think I will maybe just read one of the voices that are always interrupting the text. I came up with these voices fairly late in the writing process. Initially, for the first couple of years, it was just back and forth between El Comandante and this crazy exile guy, and I felt like. Every day I felt like running, screaming from the room with these two guys. These are men I've avoided my entire life, men like them, and their generation. And here I was, in their bloodstreams and scuttling along their apartments and their homes and their anti-skid slippers. And I thought, what am I doing here? And I thought, I need to go back to Havana and get some fresh ideas and fresh voices. And so I went. Back in 2011, I stayed for about 3 weeks, almost a month, and didn't take notes or anything, but just absorbed everything. And when I was in Havana, you get to hear, well, what songs are they playing? What are they obsessed about? What are the current jokes? For example, when I got off the plane, the first thing I heard was that the cafeteras, the little coffee makers, the espresso makers, were blowing up all over the island. I'm like, why are they blowing up? And they said, they've been mixing chickpea paste in with the coffee to extend the coffee, and then it heats up at a much higher level, and people are losing their eyes. They're hitting the ceilings. So this is what people were talking about. You don't find this in the Miami Herald or the New York Times, so this is why you have to go. I mean, at least for me. But I think I'm going to read you one section. This is probably the only completely true thing in this book. And it's an artist I met in the old section of Havana called Vedado. And I gave her a voice, but every word of this little section is true. It's called Galapagos. Again, with my accent, we'll see. This is a very difficult country. Very stressful. No quieren reconocer que esto es un fracaso, an utter disaster. I waited years for an apartment in Havana, and I couldn't wait any longer. I built my own place in between these two old mansions in Vedado. It's gloomy and narrow, but I chief the spotlight around to where I'm painting y me resuelvo. At first, the authorities considered me a squatter. Then they tried to tax me out of existence. But I parked myself here and refused to move. I live with my kitty and a baby Galapagos turtle that a friend of mine smuggled out of Ecuador. Sometimes I take Piquito to the park so he can sun himself. They tell me my turtle will live 300 years and grow to the size of a Volkswagen. But what's the use of worrying? Nobody knows what tomorrow will bring. If you chuck Piquito under the chin, like this, see? He pops his head. He loves that. My paintings, naturally, they have a sinister air. They're my hallucinations, my nightmares. Right now, I'm working on a series called Buscando Carne en La Habana, looking for meat in Havana. Meat, of course, in all respects. It's these disgraces that I'm driven to paint with my medieval palette. one disgrace after another. There are never any shortages of those. Thanks very much.
In a recent essay, Jim Longenbach, who we'll read here on Wednesday, speaks of what he calls poetic excess, which he associates with the transgression of a boundary. He is speaking, he assures us, not merely of poems whose proportions are unwieldy and therefore in need of revision. That is, of course, what comes to mind when we hear a word like excess. But no, Jim is drawing our attention to transgression where we want the standard boundaries to be overstepped. Jim tells us, in fact, that excess is central to the making of any work of art. Most especially, he says, what happens in a poem is apt to include disjointed particulars and unruly accumulation. What we want is what he calls a species of waywardness and multiplicity. Even where a poem is well made and meticulous, we will want that the information it contains, an odd word, information, but yes, we will want an aspect of the information to be indigestible. Read the poems of Rosanna Warren, and it is fair to say that the first words that come to mind will not be excess, or indigestible, or unruly, or disjointed. You are more likely to think gorgeous, or splendid, or what Henry James once called the coercive charm of form. This is a poet, after all, who gives us a line like, quote, "The sycamores ravel a canopy of cloud with knowing fingers over our heads," or "The high massed foliage shudders and shuffles its darks and hushes its blights." A poet by no means afraid to be beautiful, one who inspired the poet Anthony Heck to speak of the way she inhabits a realm of classic purity. That word, purity, not ordinarily encompassing excess. And yet, Jim Longenbach is surely onto something essential when he cites excess and unruly accumulation as central to poetry, though of course we acknowledge that what will seem excessive to one reader may not seem so to another. Leave it to Rosanna Warren to capture the relation between purity and excess with perfect lucidity in a great poem called Intermezzo Piano Solo. The concluding lines of that poem read as follows, quote, "The nights are long, meridional, raucous. I see now purity was just an effect of inexperience. In the street below, the kids crescendo, curse till dawn, practice fellatio by streetlight pressed to the wall," unquote. No need, not here, to explicate these lines, but essential, I think, to note how Rosanna introduces excess into them and thereby shows us precisely how and why purity, rigidly insisted upon, must always be, as she says, just an effect of inexperience. Excess where? Well, in the risky use of a precise but also somewhat gaudy word like meridional, in the startling insertion of the parenthetical word crescendo in the line, "In the street below, the kids crescendo curse till dawn," so that suddenly it is as if the poet were orchestrating her own poem, right? Turning the lines into a sort of musical composition. Excess there in the mixing of modes. And of course, excess again in having those inordinate cursing kids practicing fellatio, an expression which refers, sure enough, to a practice, but which also suggests the need to work at something, to practice in the sense in which persons practice an instrument and thereby produce, well, not always a crescendo, but a desired effect. All of this so deftly and compactly managed by Rosanna as to leave you marveling at how perfectly she has demonstrated her commitment to the kind of excess we adore and admire. Excess not, in fact, excessive, not gratuitous or disproportionate, but a mark of the poet's cunning and abandon. But there's another way, and say, if you will, that Rosanna is in contact with the disorder of life and with the order that poetry confers. You read her and you see how she holds in balance the inspiration of immediate experience and the discipline of a rationally constructed imagination. Quote, John brought out watercolors and painted and repainted in puddles and eddies the mountainscape he has mulled over for 50 years. When will he get it right? Unquote. No need to ask when Rosanna will get it right. But go ahead, ask and listen and hear how, always, she gets it right. Rosanna Warren.
I think we can say that Bob is the maestro of excessive introductions. Thank you. That was magnificent. Thank you. I thought I would read the first and last poems of this recent book, and then mostly new poems. Put this. Mediterranean. When she disappeared on the path ahead of me, I leaned against a twisted oak. All I saw was evening light where she had been, gold dust light, where a moment before, and 38 years before that, my substantial mother strode before me in straw hat, bathing suit, and loose flapping shirt. Every summer afternoon, her knapsack light across her back, her step in sandals firm on the stony path as we returned from the beach. And I mulled small rebellions and observed the dwarfish cork trees with their pocky bark, the wind-rustled oaks with arms akimbo, while shafts of sea light stabbed down between the trunks. There was something I wanted to say at the age of 12, some question she hadn't answered. And yesterday, so clearly seeing her pace before me, it rose again to the tip of my tongue. And the mystery was not that she walked there 10 years after her death, but that she vanished and let twilight take her place. I'll read now the last poem in the book is the title poem of the book, Ghost in a Red Hat. These cabbages under full sail, these ancient walls smothered in ivy and wisteria with its purple froth. In my middle age and sensible girth, I remember starving. I didn't know why. I practiced being a ghost. I was a girl. I thought that was how one became a woman. I lived in a village in Italy. It was picturesque. I was not picturesque. That was the project. I gnawed stale bread, roamed vineyards and olive groves, drew portraits of artichoke plants under twisted trees, recited Petrarch, and grew so thin I was a dazzling knife blade in my new white pants. The old grandmother quietly cursed in a corner. Her family ignored her. They ignored me. I recited more Petrarch and bought a broad-brimmed crimson straw hat. What to do with this girl? She learned to survive long spells of dryness. She embraced strangers, and they stayed strange. She painted still lifes, and they stayed still. She dreamed she attended a soiree at a Soho loft where the main dish on a platter garnished with parsley was a woman's naked torso, roasted, belly down, crisply hot. She looked for the small flame guttering in a sacred jar. Giving birth was one way. Holding a dying man's hand was another. She buried small animals with appropriate rites in the backyard. And here are the generations. Water and fire begat turpentine, which joined earth and brought forth color from mineral loins and boiled down vegetable soul. So steeped and soaked this land where I live now, so rushing in rain, roof tiles bristle in moss, close woven or feathery, sprigging with spores. The cemetery teems, lichen, honeysuckle, roses, little mildewed photographs under glass. Enemies make peace. Centuries fall through limestone cracks. And Edith came up the street this morning to bring me Le Monde and La Revue des Deux Mondes and a packet of fresh goat cheese before setting out in rain on her drive to the Dordogne. So that was the end of Ghost in a Red Hat, and another volume is slowly coming together. Maybe together is too hopeful. It's slowly coming. Diamonds. At midnight, the jewelry store mannequins proffer their bare necks, headless, torso-less, just the swoop of collarbone and upper chest with a meager swelling toward breasts in chill street light. Now they've achieved purity. Now, without distracting diamonds or the small polluted algae pools of emeralds, they soar. Love is a theorem, and what we proved is not what we paid for, though the ATMs keep spitting out bills in a rat-a-tat-tat of chattering teeth. In those pictures you took, the thigh carves a perfect arc against the thicket at the mouth of the cave, and flesh pleats illegibly. If it's a God who touches us when we lose ourselves, he's the briefest of flashbulbs. The image cannot endure. I shone in your arms blindly. Blindly, you cried out in the electrochemical light. We leave a burn on the air. Morning holes us, morning with crinkled eyelids, abdominal creases, and enlarged pores. Gingerly, we test our heaviness, feet on the floor. Gingerly, we hold our balance on this spinning crust of soil. This poem is called Tashlik, which is a Jewish ceremony, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, when you throw bread into running water, and it's supposed to take away your sins, with an epigraph from the psalm. Tashlik, thou wilt cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. We needed a running stream, but we had our sins. We carried our sins, but we needed bread. We found bread. We carried bread in small, stale lumps to the river running as it ought, with water slapped in the face again and again by wind. Glister from high-rises began to wink like foil in the crinkled waves, the pier carved into the current. What brilliant sins shone in the punished waves. Do high-rise sins shine brighter? What were your sins? You wouldn't tell, nor would I ask. The piles from ruined piers poked at the not quite indigo dusk while cars thrummed along the elevated west side monotone, and planes whined higher, carrying higher sins. And how was it? How did it come to be that I crushed someone's heart? It wasn't like tossing bread in a stream. Then how could it be absolved by casting bread? That heart wasn't stale. It wasn't a lump. No, more like a wounded pigeon, as if I'd stamped on its chest with my heel as it flailed, and now the chorus of excuses rises in plain song. You toss your bread. The railing is cold at my chest. Your bread shivers and bobs in the waves. I clutch my bread. And what do they mean by sin? I clutch my question. Night is hustling down over New Jersey, over the restless flow, the contradiction between a river's thrust to the sea and the tides upstream beseeching, roughed by wind. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. He lays up the deeps in storehouses, so I raise my hand in the dark. I unclench my fingers. I let one more sorrow, one more question fall into the sodden, and anonymous night. I grew up partly in France, and I spend quite a bit of time there these days, in summers often, in a scruffy southern town called Montpellier. Some of these French poems, this poem, July, it happens to be set in Montpellier, but it could be in any modern city. The France I know is definitely not tourist France. It's a tough and miserable country. I mean, I'm not joking. It is a tough and miserable country, where I was there a couple of weeks ago, arrived the day that the European election results came out, and we discovered that the main party, the dominant political party in France, is now the far-right fascist Front National. But anyway, that's not what this poem's about. It's some kind of larger context, though. July. Under the cliff walls of apartment blocks, on a narrow patch of grass as tough and discolored as old carpet, they have parked their motorbikes and distributed themselves. A tribe, a colony, girls and boys, some lounging on the sward, some on cement paving in a strip of shade, some on two facing wrought iron benches planted in concrete. Out of range of grown-ups, they play cards, they scuffle. A girl places her head on a boy's lap to practice kissing. They smoke. They pass lit cigarettes back and forth. A smaller boy pops a soccer ball against the wall with slow, heat-drugged, sidewise kicks. Hours pass. Cigarettes burn down. The ball thuds and shadows lengthen across concrete from 4 cypresses and 6 anorexic ginkgos. Day is endless. Summer is endless. Their throats sweetly sear. They drink Coke and toss the plastic bottles on the grass. This place, for now, is theirs. They can throw what they want. Their lungs are their own to burn. Their limbs loll in the loosened harmony of dancers at rest. They can pick themselves up when they want. This is another French poem. Sans domicile fixe, that's the sociological jargon in France. SDF means without a fixed abode, and it's the sociological acronym for the homeless. And there's a new, relatively recent sort of population of homeless people, sort of youthful, traveling in somewhat military garb. They're not the gypsies, and they're not the old clochards, the bums. These are youthful people who've decided they don't like the mall or whatever else is happening in modern France. And they're happening in modern France too. Sans domicile fixe. Clouds like boulders. Boulders like petrified clouds that rolled down and stalled in the meadow. That was yesterday. Now we're in the centripetal apartment with peonies aging in 2 vases, pink and cream petals frizzling into crepe. Mirrors multiply the years. I see you seeing me in the gilt-framed oval by the desk. I see us both in the window reflected in the closet door glass. My eye corners crease. Flecks of dark chocolate streak the inner spines of all the books. Words are drugs. Love is a drug, while Europe contracts into dark burgundy upholstery and cushions. Deep in the French-English dictionary, 3 asterisks mark extreme vulgarity. How long can we stay here? Outside, the new homeless twist dreadlocks and pace their mastiffs. Tattoos bulge on their forearms. Paper wrappers and crushed cans clot the gutter. Sun leaps off the roof tiles. A brisk sea wind. In the mountains, those small purple flowers with pods and curling tendrils, now you tell me, were vetch. Let's see. Eclipse. When we went looking for that eclipse of the moon in mid-Manhattan, we turned, dizzied by silhouettes of towers, and thought the moon was swallowed by hulking walls. And only when we headed home did she appear, rusted, a trace of menstrual red, half erased in her own ghostly blood, like the scraps of poems tacked to the screen porch wall of the summer cottage. After a winter of snow, wind, and rain lash, they delivered themselves shyly, ink muted, letters drained of sense. In phantom script, still Hölderlin whispered, God is near and hard to grasp, but where danger rises, grows what saves. But what did we know of saving? Rats. As if you rose out of your coffin, as if my heart was your coffin, you rose yesterday in the turquoise faceted light of syringes, hospital sheets, and toxic Niagara mist. You painted into a glossy forever. I felt again your weight upon me that Manhattan night in our quasi-childhood. You moved lovelessly upon me, almost angry. Anger, I almost allowed myself to know, as we lay on a borrowed floor trying to make what might be called love. You broke each spell, the way Proust discovered love in captured rats, squealing as the hatpin probed their vital organs. I was a slow student. I learned dumbly, blindly, and graduated to my own destructions. The white rats scamper through your landscapes of pill bottles and blood, chopped trees and massacred Adirondack deer. And I dream of knocking all the books off my shelf so that in the light, breaking from those pages, I might behold, not hold, your broken face. Scenic view. The poster in the doctor's office proposes Eden, varicose peonies tilting over a turquoise pool, blossoms lush, carnal, and tipsy as aging courtesans. We are not to take seriously the stainless steel. Technicians murmur incantations. I obey these priests. I disrobe as instructed. In the inner sanctum, the ultrasound reveals black and white galaxies aswirl in my breast, streams of stars, dazed planets, a loose comet here and there. When the high priestess moves her wand, the night sky heaves like Atlantic swells. I must have said, unknowingly, the right prayers. The dangerous stars have receded. The gods grant me, it seems, a few more years, and I walk with you again along the lake where dim waves jitter at the breakwater and soiled, piled up chunks of ice begin to melt, and the crumbling masonry of the balustrade retains its air of raffish gentility. We call this safety. Here we may stroll. Here we may pause and look out over the deep. I'm coming to the conclusion here shortly. I learned the other day that some younger people don't know who Marianne Faithfull was, so I have to say, if you don't know who Marianne Faithfull is, please go listen to her songs. She is, I think, extraordinary pop singer of the generation of the Rolling Stones, and for quite a while was the great love of Mick Jagger, and then wrecked her voice with drug addiction and living in the street, and then she became a great artist after that, I believe, with this wrecked voice. In other words, anyway, never mind, the poem will tell you the rest. A Way, with an epigraph from Marianne Faithfull. The whole trick of this thing is to get out of your own light. Marianne Faithfull. She said she sang very close to the mic to change the space. And I changed the space by striding down the Boulevard Raspail at dusk in tight jeans until an Algerian engineer plucked the pen from my back pocket. As if you're inside my head and you're hearing the song from in there. He came from the desert. I came from green suburbs. We understood nothing of one another over glasses of metallic red wine. I was playing girl. He played man. Several plots were afoot, all misfiring. One had to do with my skimpy black shirt and light hair, his broad shoulders and hunger after months on an oil rig. Another was untranslatable. Apollinaire burned his fingers on June's smoldering lyre, but I had lost my pen. The engineer read only construction manuals. His room was dim and narrow, and no, the story didn't slide that way, though there are many ways to throw oneself away. One singer did it by living by a broken wall, until she shredded her voice, but still she offered each song, she said, like an Appalachian artifact. Like trash along the riverbank, chafing at the quay, plastic bottles, a torn shirt, fractured dolls, through which the current chortles an intimate tune. Just two more. Graffiti. This first line is, I did see this scrawled on a wall in New York, so this is found. I love this line. Kitty goes commando and the Goldman rats SWI. That blue scaffolding holds up the sky. Who did we think we were padlocking in or out? Give me that huge, looping black script no one can read, a secret glyph, and just where someone has smashed the window, Jesus, the way, the truth, the life, and a dented aluminum frame. He bent down, we know, and wrote something illegible on the ground. A toothy black and white dinosaur gapes. I like the crack in this wall of monsters where skylines topple and ogres twiddle train tracks in their claws like pipe cleaners. Down the long, semi-abandoned street in Queens, calligraphy gallops toward the shop, displaying, like guitar strings, 7 different iron rods for gates. Hole in the wall. Rose sound hole, ribbed sounding board, always from fissures and gaps, melody strains as trains thunder clank across the girded overpass, a siren keens, and a solitary man ambles past amputated acacias, fisting out with leaves. And here's the last one. A cardboard carton. And from the box, from her inchworm script in blue ink on blue notepaper, soared tall feathery pines on an island in Maine, the silver light stroking a carpet of pine needles where the elderly lady inspects a carnivorous pitcher plant, its fleshy, gulping tongue and groove with a fly stuck in the gullet. And from the box rose The History of Christianity, composed by an Episcopalian master of a college at Yale, through whose paragraphs the Crusaders march in a miraculous extension of good news, and the Reformation reforms a truth at last refined to an aureole in New Haven, in mildewy pages exhaling dust in small, excitable puffs. And from the box breathed my great-grandfather's youthful poems, pining in San Francisco in 1880 for the fairer Sierra, lamenting his heart's burning error in the throbbing currents of his dreams as rivers run rust-red from the mines and the leather binding cracks and flakes in this cardboard mausoleum, onto my grandmother's sewing casket, button collection, spools of embroidery thread, and 15 different carved, inlaid, or velvet upholstered boxes, each secreting a relic: coral necklace, shoelace, thimble, French stamp. My shades, I offer you only my mistakes. A few grains of barley, a saucer of honey at the door of the tomb. Thank you.